He's a charity case, Darcy. Get used to it. He doesn't need a cake. He needs a real father who isn't a failure like you. That's what my brother said to me at my son's 8th birthday party, standing over the remains of an $85 custom dinosaur cake he'd just smashed onto my patio floor. My 8-year-old was covered in frosting. My mother was laughing. My father was staring at the grill like nothing had happened. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I knelt down, wiped a smear of green frosting off Emmett's cheek, and looked my brother dead in the eye. I hear you, Lyle. I finally hear exactly who you are. He had no idea what those words meant. But he was about to find out. Because our grandmother's trust had a morality clause, and Lyle had just triggered it in front of a Ring doorbell camera for a $170,000 mistake. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back so you understand how we got here. My name is Darcy Miller. I'm 33 years old. I'm a divorced single mother living in suburban Richmond, Virginia. My ex-husband left 5 years ago. No child support, no contact, just gone. I built everything Emmett and I have from a 1-bedroom apartment and a second-hand laptop running design software I taught myself. I'm a self-employed graphic designer. I specialize in corporate branding. Logos, identity packages, pitch decks, the kind of work that doesn't look glamorous but keeps the lights on. I pull in about $78,000 a year. It's not flashy, but every dollar of it is mine. My brother Lyle is 29, 4 years younger than me. And from the day he was born, the rules in our house were different for him. I got a used Honda for my 16th birthday. Lyle got a brand new Jeep Wrangler for his. I worked 2 jobs through community college. Lyle got his full tuition covered at a state university he barely graduated from. I built a client list 1 cold email at a time. Lyle got handed a real estate exam prep course, a licensing fee, a desk at a brokerage, and a wardrobe budget so he could, and I'm quoting my mother here, look the part. He failed his licensing exam the first time. My parents paid for his restart. That was 6 years ago, and that was the moment the financial pattern locked into place. Over the last 6 years, I have given Lyle Miller $142,000. Not because I wanted to, because my mother called. Every single time. $72,000 went to covering a 3-year office lease for Lyle's real estate firm. He wanted a glass front office in a strip plaza near the nicer part of town. He said you couldn't sell $1 million listings from a cubicle. My mother said it was an investment in the family's future. I signed the checks. $40,000 went to what my mother called bridge loans. These were cash infusions every time one of Lyle's deals fell apart. A buyer backed out. A closing got delayed. An inspection killed the sale. Each time, Lyle needed $3,000 here, $5,000 there, $8,000 to cover a gap. It added up to $40,000 in failed closings over 6 years. Not $1 was ever repaid. $30,000 went to a luxury SUV lease. Lyle said he couldn't drive clients around in a sedan. He needed a black Cadillac Escalade to project credibility. My mother agreed. She called me on a Tuesday evening and told me it was important for the family name. I paid the first 12 months of the lease and the down payment, $30,000 gone. And through all of this, Emmett and I shared a 2-bedroom rental with a window unit that barely cooled the back bedroom. My son slept under a ceiling fan that wobbled. I skipped dental appointments for 2 years so I could keep my software subscriptions active for work. But none of that mattered to my family. Because in my mother's eyes, Lyle was the future. Lyle was the one who was going to make the Miller name mean something. Lyle was the one with potential. I was just the one who paid for it. My mother, Martha Miller, is 58 years old. She has never once asked me how my business is doing. She has never once said she was proud of a client I landed or a project I delivered. But she has called me 14 times in 1 month to ask if I could help Lyle with a little cash flow issue. I know the number because I counted. She laughs when Lyle insults me. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable laugh. A real laugh. The kind that crinkles the corners of her eyes. She thinks he's clever. She thinks his cruelty is charisma. "Oh, Lyle, you're so dramatic when you're stressed," she says, every single time. My father, George Miller, is 61. He is a retired claims adjuster who now spends most of his time on the back patio with his phone and a glass of iced tea. He has never once intervened when Lyle raised his voice at me. He has never once told my mother to stop laughing. He has never once looked Emmett in the eye and said, "I'm sorry your uncle talks that way." His silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. Every time George Miller looked at his phone instead of his grandson's face, he was saying, "This is fine. This is acceptable. This is the order of things." Their house is valued at $410,000. They took out a $110,000 home equity line of credit 3 years ago. Every dollar of that HELOC went to Lyle. Office furniture, marketing materials, a website redesign that I could have done for free but was never asked to do. They mortgaged their own home to fund a man who couldn't close a deal without someone else covering the loss. And then there was Grandma Evelyn. Evelyn Smith was my mother's mother. She passed away 4 years ago at 81. She was sharp until the very end, kept her own books, balanced her own checkbook, refused to let anyone manage her money without reading every line of every document. Before she died, she established a trust, $340,000 total, split evenly between me and Lyle, $170,000 each. The trust was managed by Arthur Brooks, a 65-year-old estate attorney who had worked with our family for over 20 years. Arthur was clinical, professional, and above all, loyal to the original intent of his clients. What nobody in my family bothered to read, because nobody in my family ever reads the fine print, was the rider attached to the trust. Grandma Evelyn had added a standard of conduct clause. It was handwritten in the margins of the original document and then formally incorporated into the legal text by Arthur himself. It stated in plain language that any beneficiary who demonstrates an act of intentional cruelty or physical malice toward a minor member of the bloodline forfeits their interest immediately. Grandma Evelyn had seen things. She'd watched how my mother treated me. She'd watched how Lyle was raised to believe the world owed him everything. And she had written a single clause into her trust that said, "If you hurt a child in this family, you lose everything." I didn't know about the clause until much later, but it had been sitting there for 4 years waiting. Now let me tell you about June 12th, Emmett's 8th birthday, a Saturday. The temperature hit 91 degrees by noon. I'd set up the backyard the night before, streamers taped to the fence posts, a folding table with a paper tablecloth covered in little dinosaur prints, a cooler full of juice boxes and sodas, a stack of paper plates. Nothing extravagant, nothing expensive, just enough to make an 8-year-old feel like the day was his. The cake was the one thing I splurged on. $85 from a local bakery, custom order. A green T-Rex standing on a chocolate mountain with Emmett's name piped in white frosting across the base. Emmett had picked the design himself from a binder at the counter 3 weeks earlier. He talked about that cake every single day leading up to the party, every morning at breakfast, every night before bed. "Mom, do you think the T-Rex will have teeth? Mom, do you think they'll make the mountain look real?" That cake was the center of his world. 4 of Emmett's friends from school came. They ran through the sprinkler. They ate hot dogs. They threw water balloons at each other until the bag ran out. It was a good day, a simple day. My parents arrived at 2:30. My mother brought a store-bought pie she'd picked up on the way. She didn't bring a gift for Emmett. She never did. My father walked straight to the grill, checked the propane level, and parked himself in the lawn chair beside it with his phone. Lyle showed up at 3:45, late. He pulled into the driveway in the black Escalade I was still technically paying for. He was wearing a fitted polo and sunglasses pushed up on his head. He didn't bring a gift either. He walked into the backyard, grabbed a beer from the cooler without saying hello to Emmett, and started talking to my mother about a listing he'd lost that morning. A $12,000 commission. Gone. The buyer had walked at the last minute. Lyle was seething. I could see it in the way he gripped the bottle, the way his jaw kept tightening between sentences. My mother was nodding along, murmuring encouragement. "You'll get the next one, sweetheart. These things happen." At 4:12 p.m., I brought the cake outside. Emmett's eyes went wide. His whole face opened up. He grabbed my arm and said, "Mom, it's perfect. It's exactly perfect." His friends crowded around the table. I set the cake down in the center, right next to the paper plates and the box of candles I hadn't lit yet. Lyle was standing by the cooler, 3 feet from the table. He reached for another beer. His foot caught the edge of Emmett's toy dinosaur, a plastic stegosaurus that had been left on the patio near the cooler's leg. Lyle stumbled. He didn't fall. He caught himself on the edge of the table, but the stumble embarrassed him, and Lyle Miller does not handle embarrassment. He looked down at the toy. Then he looked at Emmett. Then he looked at the cake. And in one motion, he swept his arm across the table and sent the cake off the edge. It hit the patio floor and shattered. The green T-Rex cracked in half. The chocolate mountain crumbled into the concrete. White frosting smeared across the stone in a long, wet streak. Emmett's name split apart, letter by letter, until it was unreadable. The backyard went silent. Emmett stood frozen. His hands were still raised from where he'd been reaching toward the candles. A smear of green frosting had landed on his shirt. His lower lip trembled once, then pressed flat. He didn't cry. Not yet. He just stared at the mess on the ground like he was trying to understand how something he'd waited 3 weeks for could be gone in 1 second. Lyle didn't apologize. He didn't even look at the cake. He looked at me. He's a charity case, Darcy. Get used to it. He doesn't need a cake. He needs a real father who isn't a failure like you. My mother covered her mouth with one hand and let out a laugh. A real laugh. The kind that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Oh, Lyle, you're so dramatic when you're stressed. My father flipped a burger on the grill. He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, tongs in hand, staring at the charcoal like the last 45 seconds hadn't happened. Emmett's friends were staring. 4 8-year-olds standing in a row, dripping from the sprinkler, not making a sound. One of them had started to cry. And Emmett, my boy. My quiet, perceptive, already learned to expect nothing boy. He reached down and picked up the plastic stegosaurus from the ground. He wiped it on his shorts. He held it against his chest with both hands, and he looked up at me with eyes that weren't angry. They were tired. "It's okay, Mom," he said. His voice was small, cracked right down the middle. "I didn't need candles anyway." Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. Like a wire that had been holding too much weight for too long finally letting go. I looked at my brother. I looked at my mother, still smiling. I looked at my father, still pretending nothing had happened. And for the first time in 6 years, I didn't swallow it. I didn't push it down. I didn't tell myself this was simply what family did. I knelt beside my son, wiped the frosting off his cheek with my thumb, and said quietly, so only he could hear, "We're going to go now, okay?" He nodded. I took his hand. I picked up his backpack from the chair by the door. I walked Emmett through the house, past the hallway photos where Lyle's face hung in every frame and mine hung in none, past the kitchen counter where my mother's purse sat next to an unwrapped bottle of wine she'd brought for herself, and out the front door. I buckled Emmett into the back seat. I started the car. The engine turned over with a low, steady hum. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I could see the front door was still open. Nobody had followed us out. I drove home in silence. Emmett fell asleep in the back seat before we reached the highway, the plastic stegosaurus still pressed against his chest, his fingers curled around it like it was the only thing in the world that hadn't let him down. I kept both hands on the wheel. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. When we got home, I carried him inside. He was heavy for 8, tall for his age, and his sneakers bumped against the doorframe as I shifted him onto the couch. I pulled his shoes off, draped a blanket over him, and stood there for a long time, watching his chest rise and fall. The house was quiet except for the hum of the window unit in the back bedroom. I sat down at the kitchen table. My laptop was still open from that morning, a half-finished logo mock-up for a dental group in Henrico County glowing on the screen. I closed it. I put both hands flat on the table. I stared at the wall. I stayed like that for a long time. At some point, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. I didn't open it. Another buzz, then another. I turned the phone face down and left it there. I made Emmett a grilled cheese when he woke up around 7. He ate half of it. He didn't mention the cake. He didn't mention Lyle. He didn't mention the party at all. He just asked if he could watch a show before bed, and I said yes. And we sat together on the couch while some cartoon played, and neither of us really watched it. I put him to bed at 8:30. He brushed his teeth without being asked. He climbed under the covers and pulled the blanket up to his chin. I sat on the edge of his mattress and pushed his hair off his forehead. Mom? Yeah? Do they love me? I felt the air leave my chest. Not fast. Slow, like a tire with a nail in it. I love you, I said, and that's the only thing that matters tonight. He nodded. He turned onto his side. Within 5 minutes, his breathing went slow and even. I closed his door. I walked back to the kitchen. I sat down in the same chair. And at 3:17 a.m., still sitting there with coffee that had gone cold hours ago, I opened the Ring doorbell app on my phone. The camera on the front porch had a wide-angle lens. It covered the driveway and most of the front yard, but because of the way I'd set up the party, the edge of the patio was visible through the gap between the house and the fence. I'd never checked the angle before. I'd installed it for package theft, but there it was, clear enough to hold up in any room that mattered. Lyle reaching across the table, the cake sliding off the edge, the shatter on the concrete. Emmett standing frozen. And then Lyle's mouth moving, his body turned toward me, his finger pointed at my son. The audio was clean. Every word. He's a charity case, Darcy. I watched it twice, then a third time. Then I closed the app, set the phone down, and sat perfectly still in the dark kitchen with nothing but the streetlight cutting through the blinds. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Sharp and clean and final, like a blade laid flat against glass. I was done pretending this was okay. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Lyle. I didn't write a long email to my father explaining how his silence had gutted his grandson. I didn't do any of the things I would have done 6 months ago, or 6 years ago, or any other time I tried to explain my pain to people who had never once been interested in hearing it. Instead, I did one thing. I opened my email. I typed one name into the address bar, Arthur Brooks. I attached the Ring footage. I wrote a single line in the body. Arthur, this is Darcy Miller. Please review the attached video in the context of the standard of conduct rider in the Evelyn Smith Trust. I believe a forfeiture event has occurred. I read it twice. I pressed send. The soft, unmistakable click of confirmation echoed in the dead silence of the kitchen. Then I closed the laptop. I washed my coffee mug. I put it back in the cabinet. I checked the lock on the front door. I walked to my bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, and slept through the night for the first time in months. The phone rang at 8:41 a.m. on June 14th, 2 days after the party. Arthur Brooks. Darcy, he said. His voice was the same as it had always been, level, measured. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years reading documents other people didn't bother to open. I've reviewed the footage. I've reviewed the trust language. I'd like you to come to my office this morning. What time? 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Arthur's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Grove Avenue, above a title company and across from a bakery that smelled like sourdough. I'd been there once before, 4 years ago, when Grandma Evelyn's trust was first read. Lyle hadn't attended. He'd sent a text saying he was closing a deal. My mother had laughed about it. That's our Lyle, always working. I sat across from Arthur at his desk. He had a manila folder open in front of him, the Smith Trust printed on the tab in block letters. His glasses were pushed up on his forehead. The Ring footage was paused on his monitor, frozen on the frame where Lyle's arm was mid-sweep and the cake was still airborne. Arthur looked at me over the folder. Your grandmother was a careful woman, he said. I know. She added the standard of conduct rider because she told me, and I'm quoting from my case notes, I've watched that boy grow up mean, and I won't let my money reward it. I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Arthur opened the folder and turned it so I could read it. The clause was on page 11, paragraph 4, formally incorporated into the legal text in Grandma Evelyn's own handwriting first, then typed and notarized by Arthur's office. Any beneficiary who demonstrates an act of intentional cruelty or physical malice toward a minor member of the bloodline forfeits their interest immediately. Forfeited funds shall be redirected into a restricted educational subtrust for the benefit of the injured minor. Arthur closed the folder. The footage is unambiguous, he said. The act is intentional. The target is a minor beneficiary. The language is triggered. I'm prepared to send a formal notice of forfeiture to Lyle this afternoon. And my parents? Arthur removed his glasses and set them on the desk. Martha and George Miller are listed as backup trustees of the fund. The trust's protective mandate requires trustees to intervene in any situation where a minor beneficiary is at risk. The footage shows Martha laughing. It shows George doing nothing. That constitutes a failure to uphold the protective mandate. I'll be sending a removal of trustee notice to both of them. I sat with that for a moment. Lyle's $170,000, I said, moved into a restricted educational subtrust for Emmett, tuition, books, room, and board when the time comes. Lyle won't be able to touch it, neither will your parents. I nodded once. Do it. Arthur picked up his pen. I'll have the notices sent by end of business today. I stood up. I shook his hand. I walked out of the office, down the stairs, and into the June heat. The bakery across the street was playing soft music through an open door. I could smell bread. The sky was clear. I got in my car and drove home. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity. Nothing except the clean, even hum of the engine and the quiet certainty that I had done exactly what Grandma Evelyn had built that clause to do. The notices arrived at Lyle's apartment and my parents' house on the morning of June 15th. Arthur told me later that he sent them certified mail, signature required. My phone started buzzing at 11:47 a.m., Lyle first. I declined without hesitation. Then my mother declined. My father, which surprised me, because George Miller hadn't voluntarily called me in 3 years. Declined. Lyle again. Declined. My mother again. Declined. 17 missed calls by 2 p.m. I turned off the ringer. By 4, the voicemails had started piling up. I didn't listen to a single one. I deleted them as they appeared, one after another, watching the notification count drop back to 0 each time. At 6:15 p.m. on June 16th, 48 hours after I'd walked into Arthur's office, my doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen making pasta for Emmett. He was at the table doing a worksheet from summer reading. The doorbell rang 3 times fast, then a 4th, longer. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I walked to the front door. I looked through the peephole. Lyle. His face was red, not sunburned. The kind of red that comes from 2 days of panic compressed into the space behind a man's eyes. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like he'd pulled at it on the drive over. His polo was untucked on one side. His hair was flat, unwashed. I opened the front door but kept the screen door closed and latched. I stood behind it with one hand on the frame. Darcy. His voice cracked on the second syllable. You need to call that lawyer and fix this. I didn't respond. I just looked at him. This is insane. Over a cake? Over a stupid birthday cake? You're going to take $170,000 from me over a cake? I stayed quiet, letting him continue. I'm your brother. That money was mine. Grandma left it to me. You can't just take it because you're upset about a party. I kept my voice steady. The trust isn't a suggestion, Lyle. It's a contract. And you just broke it for a $170,000 tantrum. His jaw tightened. His hands were shaking. He pressed both palms against the screen door like he could push through it. You're holding this over me. You're using our grandmother's money to punish me because you've always been jealous. You've always resented that Mom and Dad believed in me more than they believed in you. I gave you $142,000 over 6 years, Lyle. $72,000 for your office, $40,000 in bridge loans you never repaid, $30,000 for the Escalade sitting in my driveway right now. I wasn't jealous. I was the only person in this family who ever actually helped you, and you smashed my son's cake and called him a charity case. Lyle's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Call the lawyer, Darcy. Call him right now. I'll apologize. I'll say whatever you want. I'll say it to Emmett. Just call him. No. Darcy? No. His eyes went wide. He stepped back from the screen door. For the first time in his life, Lyle Miller was looking at me and seeing someone he couldn't talk past. Couldn't charm. Couldn't guilt. Couldn't wear down with volume and repetition until the check cleared. You're going to regret this, he said. His voice dropped. It wasn't a scream. It was the hollow, scraped-out sound of a man realizing the floor beneath him had been someone else's the entire time. Goodbye, Lyle. I closed the front door. Not a slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I stood there for a moment. My hand was still on the knob. Through the door, I could hear his footsteps on the porch, then the crunch of gravel, then the Escalade's engine starting. The sound faded as he pulled away. I walked back to the kitchen. Emmett was still at the table, pencil in hand, worksheet half done. He looked up at me. "Was that Uncle Lyle?" "Yes." "Is he coming in?" "No," I said. "He's not coming in." Emmett nodded slowly. He looked back down at his worksheet. Then, without looking up, he said, "Good." I stood at the counter. I finished making the pasta. The house was quiet except for the scratch of Emmett's pencil and the low bubble of water on the stove. The window unit hummed in the back bedroom. I felt nothing dramatic. No triumph, no grief, just relief. Like a door had closed on a room I'd been standing in for 6 years, and the air on this side was finally clean. I went through my phone that night after Emmett fell asleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the screen glowing in the dark room, and I did it slowly, deliberately, like I was cleaning out a wound. I blocked Lyle's number first, then my mother's, then my father's. I removed myself from the Miller family group chat. I deleted the thread without scrolling back through it. I removed my parents from Emmett's emergency contact list at school and replaced them with his after-school coordinator, a woman named Beth Taylor who had known him since kindergarten and who had never once made him feel like he was in the way. I opened my email and archived every message from a Miller address without reading the subject lines. 14 unread. I selected all. I moved them to a folder I labeled Closed. I didn't delete them. Arthur had told me to keep everything, just in case, but I never opened that folder again. I changed the code on the front gate. I updated the Ring doorbell setting so that any motion from an unfamiliar vehicle after 7 p.m. would trigger an alert directly to my phone. I removed my parents from the shared photo album I'd been adding Emmett's school pictures to for 3 years. 3 years of uploads. Not once had either of them commented on a single photo. I didn't do any of this in anger. I did it in clarity. Each tap felt like setting down something I'd been carrying too long. By the time I was finished, the screen had dimmed to black and the house was perfectly still. I plugged in the phone, set it face down on the nightstand, and slept through the night. 3 days passed without a sound from anyone, then a week, then 2. On the 9th day, Arthur Brooks called, not to deliver bad news, to deliver a warning. "Your parents retained a lawyer," he said, "a man named Dennis Crawford out of Chesterfield. They're threatening to file a civil action to restore Lyle's share of the trust. The argument is that the morality clause is unenforceable and that the forfeiture constitutes an unlawful interference with a beneficiary's vested interest." I sat at my kitchen table and listened. "What does that mean for me?" "Nothing," Arthur said. "The clause was drafted in compliance with Virginia trust law. It was formally incorporated, witnessed, and notarized. I handled the execution personally. The footage is time-stamped, high definition, and includes clear audio. There is no ambiguity in the act and no ambiguity in the language." "And my parents?" "I sent Crawford a letter this morning. I informed him that if Martha and George Miller proceed with the suit, I will file a countersuit for fiduciary negligence. They were named backup trustees. The trust's protective mandate required them to intervene on behalf of any minor beneficiary at risk. The video shows Martha laughing during an act of physical aggression toward her 8-year-old grandson. It shows George standing 3 feet away, doing nothing. That isn't passive. That's a documented failure of their fiduciary duty." Arthur paused. I heard him turn a page. Crawford called me back 40 minutes later. They're dropping the case. I thanked him. I hung up. I set the phone down. I finished the logo mock-up I'd been working on for a pediatric clinic in Short Pump. I invoiced the client. I made Emmett a sandwich for lunch. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. 3 weeks after the forfeiture notices went out, Lyle's world started to come apart at the seams. I didn't go looking for this information. I didn't ask. But Richmond isn't a big city, and the design industry overlaps with commercial real estate more than people think. I heard things through clients, through vendors, through a property manager named Janet Wilson who had contracted me for branding work and who happened to know Lyle's former broker. The first thing that went was the money he didn't have. Lyle owed $12,000 to a private lender, a short-term note he'd taken out 2 months before the party to cover a gap on a deal that never closed. He'd been counting on the trust disbursement to pay it back. Without the $170,000, the note came due and he had nothing. He defaulted within 30 days. The lender filed a judgment. Lyle's credit score, which had already been shaky, dropped to 489. The Escalade went next. The lease I had been funding. With no one covering the payments, he fell behind within 6 weeks. The vehicle was repossessed from the parking lot of his glass front office on a Tuesday morning while he was inside making calls. Janet told me one of the neighboring tenants watched it happen through the window. The office followed. The 3-year lease I had covered, $72,000 in total, had expired 4 months earlier, but Lyle had signed a renewal on his own at $2,400 a month. Without my money, without the trust, without a single closing in the pipeline, he couldn't make the second payment. The landlord locked him out in August. Lyle pulled a cardboard box of files out through the back entrance and loaded them into a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla he'd borrowed from a friend. By September, his brokerage had quietly removed his listing page from their website. No announcement, no termination letter that I knew of. Just a blank space where his headshot used to be. My parents felt it too. The $110,000 HELOC they'd taken out on their $410,000 home, the one they'd spent entirely on Lyle's career, was still accruing interest. Without the trust serving as a silent safety net, without me answering the phone, the monthly payments fell entirely on George's retirement income. They started cutting. Martha stopped going to the salon in Carytown she'd visited every 6 weeks for a decade. George canceled the cable package. They listed the boat, a 17-foot base boat George had bought 3 years ago, on a local swap page for $4,200. It sold in 2 days. Word got around. The way it always does in a neighborhood where everyone has lived on the same block for 20 years. A woman named Paula Anderson, who went to the same church as my mother, told a mutual acquaintance that Martha had stopped attending the women's luncheon, stopped showing up to book club, stopped answering texts from the group thread. Paula said Martha seemed smaller, like she was folding inward. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard that. I didn't feel pity either. I felt nothing. That chapter was closed. I had already moved on. 6 months after the forfeiture, I heard through Janet that Lyle had taken a night shift position at a warehouse distribution center off Midlothian Turnpike, $17.50 an hour, loading pallets from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She said someone from the property management office had spotted him in the parking lot at shift change, wearing a reflective vest and carrying a lunch bag. He was driving the borrowed Corolla. The friend hadn't asked for it back, apparently, or maybe no one else wanted it. I didn't drive by. I didn't look him up. I didn't check. I simply let the information pass through me like weather. 1 year after the birthday party, on a Saturday morning in June, I woke up to sunlight coming through the bedroom window and the sound of Emmett laughing in the living room. He was watching something on the tablet, cross-legged on the couch, still in his pajamas. The window unit was off. The spring air was warm enough to leave the windows cracked. I had signed 3 new clients in the previous 4 months. A veterinary group, a craft brewery, and a regional insurance office. My annual income had crossed $94,000 for the first time. I'd moved us into a small 3-bedroom house with a fenced backyard and a kitchen that got morning light. Emmett had his own room. He'd picked the paint color himself. Sage green, like the T-Rex on the cake, he never got to blow candles on. He'd made honor roll in the fall and again in the spring. He joined the school's robotics club. He had 2 close friends, boys named Jack and Owen, who came over on weekends to build things out of cardboard boxes and duct tape in the backyard. He laughed more. He slept through the night. He stopped flinching when someone raised their voice on television. On June 12th, exactly 1 year after the party, I made Emmett's 9th birthday cake myself. It wasn't custom. It wasn't $85. It was a box mix from the grocery store, chocolate with vanilla frosting, and I let him write his own name on top with a tube of blue icing. He misspelled it. He wrote Emmett. He didn't care. We ate it at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us. No streamers, no folding tables, no extended family pulling into the driveway with empty hands and full opinions. Just 2 plates, 2 forks, and a cake with a missing tea. After he blew out the candles, 9 of them, one for each year, he looked up at me with frosting on his lip and said, "This is the best birthday I've ever had." I smiled at him. My throat tightened, but I held it. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He scraped his fork across the plate. "No one's yelling. No one's being mean. It's just us." "Just us?" I said. He nodded. Then he said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "We don't need a bigger cake to have a better life. We just needed to get the rot out of the house." I stared at him, 8 years old, going on 9, and he'd found the words I'd spent 6 years looking for. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "I made it up," he said, and then he took another bite of cake. I didn't look back. Not at the Escalade payments, not at the bridge loans, not at the glass front office or the HELOC or the $142,000 I'd poured into a family that never once poured anything back. Some doors close so better ones can open. And the one that opened for Emmett and me let in more light than I ever thought possible. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.